I've been looking forward to this interview. Perfect timing, the stars and the planets aligned. Freddy Silva is a best-selling author, leading researcher of ancient civilizations, restricted history, sacred sites, and their interaction with consciousness. He's also a leading expert on crop circles. The latest book is part of a Common Sentience series, Portals, Energetic Doorways to Mystical Experiences Between Worlds. The fact his tours are sold out speaks for itself.
I watch people over the course of a week, say in Egypt, they arrive in Egypt in a certain way. And when they leave 10 days later, they're not the same when they arrived. And if that's the case, then I've done my job properly.
Talking with Freddy Silva, Portals. The newest book, the first one I knew about was the crop circles. When you had an experience, you talked about that. And for me, you made it real. So first, I want to say thank you. I appreciate your work with the crop circles. And I love what you've shared in Portals. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
This seems like these kinds of events have been happening to you all your life, but you actually did the mainstream thing till you were about 38 and then said, okay, I'm done. What happened? Yeah.
I was having experiences before that. I just didn't know what the hell they were because there's no one around to tell me. Now that I look back in hindsight. I was sort of following the trajectory in the corporate world, not really enjoying myself and wondering how the hell can I make a living looking at, talking to large upright rocks or going to ancient temples. Because I was getting fired left, right, and center for having a conscience, I sit down and look at my navel for a week and pick up the books that I had on my bookshelf about pyramids and things. And one day, as you said, I sort of got involved in crop circle research and incredible stroke of luck that my first book becomes an international bestseller. Little did I know that at the time, before I started studying ancient temples and standing stones and other monuments, that they're all built exactly on the same principles of the manipulation of electromagnetism. So a crop circle is built upon those foundations, and a pyramid or Stonehenge or a standing stone marks the spots on Earth where the laws of physics as we know them are a little different. The weather's a little bit different, just enough for you to slip through into another level of reality and hopefully, under the right conditions, return with information which is very empowering. So that's kind of how I sort of got started. It was just curiosity, sort of passion about a topic, but then it was personal experiences of things that kept happening to me. And I think what I call the management was trying to push me in a certain direction just by saying, yes, so you're not imagining this stuff, it's really happening. And the best part is you're going to have to go and research it and tell people that there's a science behind it. So that's what kind of makes it fun.
I like the comment you have about portals. It's a contact station with the miraculous, an island of stability amid a landscape of chance. Okay, that's still a little bit ephemeral. I mean, it's still kind of out there to say a landscape of chance.
Oh, I mean, the Egyptians actually said it quite well. They said that an incarnation is a spiritual death, and we spent most of our lives trying to figure out the tools with which to find out why we're here or what our sole purpose is. And it was for this reason why they built temples to try and remind us that, we are the temple already, but we forget that we have this power and there's no one to tell us about this power. And if you happen to go to these hotspots on the face of the earth, you walk in, all hunched over with the weight of the world on your shoulders. But when you leave, you're a very different person. And then, like driving a car, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And that's why what I call these insurance policies have been built all around the world to help us get to that connection. But science comes along usually decades later. I mean, we get the whole woo-woo thing first. We get that sort of feeling, that spiritual content. But science eventually grudgingly gets there. And there was one very famous experiment that I still recall. It was by a skeptic who was an electrical engineer by the name of Pierre Méreau. And he wrote a pamphlet, which wasn't taken very seriously at all. I don't know why. He went round prodding the standing stones of the Brittany region of France, where we have one of the greatest concentrations of megaliths anywhere on the planet. And he said the same question, all these people hugging stones, it's so ridiculous. And then he writes one of the best books validating why people are doing this and what's happening to them. And in a nutshell, he said, the big menhirs, the big standing stones, they behave like coils. And the dolmens, they behave like solenoids. And the stone circles behave like batteries. They gather the energy of the land and they store it and they release it every 80 minutes. And if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, like I have been many times, and you touch these stones, you get one hell of an electric shock. Now, what went? I have to sort of taste it and lick it and talk about it. I just go for it. Now, but the funny thing is that we now have the ability to measure the frequencies of these sites, and it turns out they're designed to stop your brain from thinking and move it to a place where you start feeling. And that's the magical place. So science can now do this. We can go into the Great Pyramid and say, yes, the weather outside is very different to the weather inside. And those frequencies are designed to get you almost into a place in the same frequency range as a psychic at work. And you start looking at this all around the world and you think there's a plan here. And the plan is, again, to try and get you out of your head, out of your brain, and get you to connect with a final level of reality and what I call accessing the astral reference library. So we now have the means to prove that people are not nuts when they go to these places. They really are picking up this information. But again, the trick is, how can you figure out what's coming from your head and what's really coming from the sacred site? And that takes a little bit more nuance.
Well, I think you said something about that with dowsing. When I think it was a master dowser who said, no, that's not the way to do it. You're pushing it. And all of a sudden you had to relearn how to dowse. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. It was really infuriating. I mean, a whole year and a half of work had been thrown away. But, you're going to be honest about it. You have to be honest with yourself when you're doing this work, because if you're going to be a teacher, that's a huge responsibility. You've got to get it right. I mean, there's so much nonsense out there in this kind of specialist field that I feel I have a responsibility to tell people the truth as best as I can. One of the biggest advantages was to have people around me to give me a quality check and say, you really want this to happen. You want the rods to move, or you want this, such and such a thing to appear before your very eyes to make you feel special. I said, well, yes. So I said, just throw all that away. Expect nothing. And it's one of the biggest pieces of information that I was given. Best piece of advice, expect nothing, but go there with a very clear, specific aim. Give the universe a big picture of the playing field and the goalposts, and let them kick the ball through the goalposts for you, and then you pick it up on the other side. And I tell you, it makes a huge difference, because now I know that it's not coming from me. The experience is actually coming from my experience with the site, and I'm always astonished at what information that I pick up. In fact, I don't really tell this to many people, but because they ask me, well, what's the foundation and the beginning of all your books that you've written and all the documentaries you produced? And I said, between you and me, I go to a sacred place and I say, what's this all about? And I get back this torrent of information, whether it's a dream or I just start writing feverishly about stuff I know nothing about. And then I go, well, that's interesting. Where did that come from? And then I go in libraries and I start picking up information. I go to research facilities. I go to scientific papers, and it's there. That's what takes a long time to put this stuff down and write a good book. But that's what sort of motivates the whole thing to get this information so that it becomes useful to people. And that drives the whole conversation. So, if it's coming from your need for validation, it's going to come from you. But if you go there expecting nothing, you're going to be very pleasantly surprised.
There's also this preconceived notion that when you go somewhere that because you are educated and you have been taught a certain thing, maybe Western civilization has this belief system that everything that they have said about this stuff is true, and the indigenous cultures were just probably doing a whole lot of whatever substance there was helpful. And I like the fact that you say, this isn't necessary to have a special substance. This stuff is real. And when you shut your mind down and you start allowing your sense, your insight, your intuition to act, then you get the real stuff, the gold. That's what I think it is. It's gold. But it requires you to step away from all the things you think you know.
Absolutely. And I think we take so much of that expectation with us, especially today where everybody's so frightened by so much fear and uncertainty that we tend to project that onto these places. But that's not what it's about. And in fact, it's much more real and much more beneficial if you go there expecting nothing and just clear your head. I take people on to sacred site tours around the world. I mean, these things sell out in 50 seconds, and I'm not exaggerating because, I don't do the usual tourist thing. by pointing to the left and then pointing to the right. No, I just sort of give you the sort of things that need to be discussed, and then I'll leave you to go and play. I watch people over the course of a week, say in Egypt. They arrive in Egypt in a certain way, and when they leave 10 days later, they're not the same when they arrived. And if that's the case, then I've done my job properly, because I've steered in a certain direction to filter out all the nonsense and let them have the experience. And people would write back to me 6 months later and say, that experience, that changed my life. I've completely thrown out my old ways of doing things, and I'm so much better. I lost half of my income, but I'm so much happier because of what I'm doing now. And you can't make this stuff up. So I see the benefits on a day-to-day basis of the interaction with sacred space, which is, the whole reason why it's called sacred space, and the reason why our ancestors went to a lot of trouble to mark these places, because I think they had the foresight to look into the future in a crystal ball and say, those poor people in the 21st century, they're going to be seduced by social media and cell phones and big screen TVs, and they'll have no idea of what's around them. And they're absolutely right. So once you get away from all this and put yourself in a space which is set aside from the modern world, in 10 days, you will notice how much you can keep that pollution out of your head and your body, and you can have a degree of control of your daily life. And I think that's a huge benefit.
Well, I think in that way you're acting and reacting with something that's authentic. It's internal. It's a connection. And like what you describe in the book, the temple builders, the people who were instrumental in creating these sites, they knew this was a living space. This isn't just a dead area. This isn't just grass. It isn't just stones. These are beings. And I think with your information, you also have the benefit of having interacted. You're saying the management, but when the shining ones, who also are referred to in your writing, came through in Egypt, that's incredible. And that would be empowering. And you have to somehow figure out how to translate that to others. And when you take them to a site and turn them loose, I think that's the best way to say, hey, it's here. It's up to you to connect.
Oh, absolutely. There's many times that we go to the King's Chamber, for example, and people have all kinds of expectations. So, of course, I knock them right down. It's very disappointing for them. I've paid X amount of money to be here, and you're knocking down my expectation. I said, yeah, I am. Don't take anything in there. Just be pleasantly surprised. Even I don't know what goes on in there, because it's really dependent on the group energy. And the less people you take in, the better the connection. And I can't tell you how many times I've witnessed a group being totally in sync and expecting nothing. And when I do a guided meditation in there, and we're in total darkness, by the way, and there are certain times when, I don't go in expecting anything. I don't even know if I'm going to be doing a meditation or what's coming through, if anything at all. I'm at the point where I don't even want to predict anything in case people get totally disappointed. What happens, if it's appropriate. But I can't tell you how many times I've opened my eyes in the middle of this meditation and I look up and the ceiling is gone. And I'm watching the stars and constellations in the Milky Way. Sometimes the floor disappears. And I don't say anything. And sometimes people come out of the stones. That's happened several times. And they'll stand behind people with their arms open. I'm thinking, internal dialogue. I hope nobody's thinking of falling over on their heads and cracking their skulls on the floor, because that's not good for business. And but I'll let it go. And then at dinner, I'll just say, well, if anybody wants to share any experience, no matter how crazy it sounds, because I like crazy, let me know. Because part of the fun is for me to get feedback. And half the people will describe exactly what I saw. The ceiling has disappeared. I'm seeing the stars, or the floor's completely gone. It's like I'm floating in the middle of the King's Chamber, or people came around behind me with their arms open, and they're very tall. They're dressed in these white gowns. That's exactly what I saw. So it confirms for me that I'm not crazy. And also it confirms for them that they're having a valid group experience, and that will change your life.
Well, you have a way of connecting. And like you said, the more you do it, the better you get. But I like the experience you share. There are some times when you go to a place and it's like, I need to leave. And this was Laughlin, Nevada, which is really funny because that's the big be-all, end-all for UFO conferences. This is one you're supposed to go to. I haven't gone there. But I did go to one in Texas, and I had the same kind of feeling like, this is not the right space. Okay, so you went there. Could you describe what happened?
At the UFO conference?
Yeah, in Laughlin, Nevada. You said it was the most disturbed environment you've ever encountered,
I got it.
casino.
Yes. I'm having so many of them that I'm losing track of them. No, it was a very unusual UFO conference, mostly because of the location. It was in the middle of a casino, and it was like they had these cards attached to their neck, and they would plug these into these machines which spun these sort of aces and cards and things. I don't know what they're called. One-armed bandits, they call them. And they look green. Their skin looked green. I thought, I got to get out of this building. And so I paid someone to take me several miles out of Laughlin. And suddenly you're out of this desert metropolis, and you're in the middle of these hills. And I had no idea what was around there. And we're just driving up the hill. And suddenly I said, can you pull off the road here if you can? Go towards that sort of little sort of cliff face there. And so we got out. And I'm horribly scared of snakes. I have a phobia of snakes. And it didn't even occur to me there was rattlesnakes everywhere. I just went straight towards this cliff face. And the entire cliff face is like a newspaper. It's covered in petroglyphs. Now, we know already that when you find a big conglomeration of petroglyphs anywhere on the planet, it marks, and I don't know how they did this in the old days, it marks the confluence of two different types of geology. And those two different types of geology create what is called a conductivity discontinuity. Luckily, the Sioux had a better word for it. They called it scan. And they talked about how when you get these two different structures in geology and they're rubbing against each other, you create this altered state of consciousness due to the electromagnetic frequency at those sites. And people went there to get that experience, and they would carve or paint on the rocks what they had seen on the other side. Of course, you have to interpret all of this through their own language, which is the hard part. But I tell you, suddenly the people that I was with next to this rock face full of petroglyphs, it's like we were having an out-of-body experience and being completely cleansed of all of that negativity. And I almost paid someone not to take me back to the casino in the conference, because I said, I don't want to go back in there. I feel so much better. Meanwhile, there's snakes everywhere. And I don't even realize what's going on around me because I feel so connected to the spirit of place. And people had a lovely time. And yeah, it was hours before we left and returned.
Well, it might have been that you needed to have that experience to trigger you to go and check out the petroglyphs.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what led me to discover the scientific experiments that they had found, the coincidence between these large pockets of petroglyphs, not just the one or two. I'm talking a whole wall of petroglyphs, that they would coincide with these geological anomalies. That was a huge surprise. It was the same thing that they did in Australia with the Aboriginal people, where they said, these people must be smoking something. They'll walk across the desert. There's nothing there to tell you what's going on. It's just sand. And then suddenly they'll hear something and they'll turn right and they'll continue upon that invisible road for 60 miles and they'll reach a sacred place. And they figure that can't be by accident. There's got to be some kind of memory in the land that they're tapping into. Now, the human body is an electromagnetic vehicle to begin with. So since we're dealing with electromagnetism on the landscape, it's like one thing calling to another. You just have to be a little bit more mindful. They found out that when people used these jalkiri, or these spirit roads, as they call them, to reach, go from A to B to reach sacred places, the accuracy was above 67% in featureless desert. That's the difference between life and death. But when they tried to use the same spirit roads to go to non-spiritual places, the margin of error was huge. I mean, it was like, I think the accuracy was less than 3%. So it just shows you that there's a reason why they call it sacred space.
When you talk with the management, and was it the first time you connected in the crop circles with the management? Is that how that started?
Yeah, I didn't realize what it was at the time. Again, I was just sort of following the leads based on nothing. I'm just literally learning as I'm going. And it was one day when I was getting a little bit frustrated, and I had all these links. We had all the science. We had the things with the crops that were falling down, the changes in dynamics of the plants. We had soil analysis. We had changes in electromagnetic signatures. We had gravitational signatures, which is extraordinary. A crop circle influencing the Earth's gravitational field, but how do they come together? And in my frustration, I said, listen, I really need to know who's behind this. and why are you doing this? And one day this crop circle just appeared, literally 24 hours after I put the word out. And I walk in, I went, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for. And I had no idea what I was talking about. But I came back in the middle of the night. It was 11:30 at night. And I took a boombox back then. Anybody who's under 30 will have to sort of Google boombox and cassette tape, because that's something that doesn't happen these days. So I put a tape in there, and you have 45 minutes of music on one side before the click happens and the tape stops. And I took it with me just to keep me company. 11:30 in the middle of the night in a wheat field in Wiltshire. You don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not into abduction scenarios, so I didn't want to be abducted by aliens. So call me silly. So next thing I know, I'm levitating above the field. I mean, literally, I'm watching my arms floating around me, and I still remember saying, "That's interesting." And I can't feel the wheat or the ground on my back anymore. And I'm watching these people again in the middle of the night. It's totally dark, and there are three people either side of me. They're about 8 feet tall, dressed in these beautiful white satin gowns. And there's two people at my feet communicating through this non-visual language, using shapes with their hands, kind of like Balinese dancers do. And I knew exactly what was going on. I couldn't explain it, but I was comfortable with these people. And I thought, okay, I get it. Next thing you know, I hear the click. 45 minutes had gone, and I hit the ground with such a thud that next morning, people at breakfast could still see the lump on the back of my neck. So I didn't make this up. And luckily, one of my friends there was a wonderful psychic who works with the police in Britain, obviously under an assumed name, because they don't want to know that they're using psychics to solve crimes. And she said, you know what, before you even open your mouth, which I didn't say anything, I was in total shock. I said, you've been selected to write a book on this topic. And I went, oh, do me a favor. I'm making lots of money in advertising. I'm a creative director. I have awards. I'm totally miserable at doing what I'm doing. But you know what? I'm not going to give up a comfortable life. Well, within 2 weeks, my 14-year-old marriage is over. I lost my house, my cars, my friends. And I'm writing this book, which eventually becomes an international bestseller. So that's my first experience with the management. But little did I know that these people had been around in physical form in our Earth history. And they became the foundation for my second book and the subsequent books after that. So I didn't realize at the time that these people have been guiding my research. And now they're like an extended family, and I trust them implicitly. I don't take them for granted at all. I mean, like us, they're not perfect either. And I found out that they were originally called Watchers, Shining Ones. They appear all around the planet. And when I was writing my seventh book, The Missing Lands, it was really about all of these gods that were around the planet who did exactly what we're talking about. They would locate the portals on the face of the planet. They would manipulate the laws of nature within the laws themselves to favor a connection with a non-physical reality. And then they built temples on top of them. So it turns out that they are found in South America, they're in Polynesia, they're in Japan, China, in India, all around the world, but they call them by slightly different names. So you have to learn the local language to understand that they're all part of the same brother and sisterhood. And through the channeling material, they said, yeah, we are what you became known as your guardian angels in your particular culture. We just suggest we don't have the will to change what's going on in human affairs because that's your job. Otherwise, it would invalidate the reason for incarnating. We just supply information and guidance should you ask for it, and then we just get out of the way. And that's why we're called watchers. We can only watch. And I thought, wow, that's a very elegant way of putting it. So you can still catch up with all of these people at certain places around the world, and that's pretty much one of the functions of the portals.
I like the way you described that, also using the word watchers, because that's something I have felt personally. Also, what you're mentioning is that they appear to whatever culture you happen to be in, they appear to you as someone familiar. So it isn't like the ET or, some giant, real weird monster being. They try to make you comfortable in whatever appearance they choose.
They do, and I found that they don't really look the way they do to us. Well, even in the Great Pyramid, for example, that's just a way that they present to us that makes us comfortable. They don't have any physical form that we could possibly understand or even comprehend should we meet them in reality, because it'll frighten the hell out of us. I mean, if you meet a being with 6 heads and 14 arms, you think that's not going to end well. But, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we have no experience. They have no physical experience of that. So it'll frighten the hell out of us. So for that reason, they will manifest in a way that's comfortable for the culture. I remember when I was in Ireland learning my craft, and my fearless spiritual leader would go to an old mound that had been turned into a graveyard by the Christian community, and we were there to clean the place up and also to learn how to use sacred space. And I remember at the end of the session, after 20 minutes, that someone was clinging to my arm. And I looked down and I pulled up my arm, and there was this sort of naked 2-year-old onion head guy or woman with a big protruding pot belly and these little stick-like legs. And it began to look at me and sort of make these horrible sounds like, put me down, in no uncertain terms. And I just thought, oh, he's got a bit of an ego, this guy. And I just put him down, and he kept holding my finger, because my finger's about half the size of his arm. And I thought, I like this guy. He's actually very nice, He's obviously got pride. He doesn't be lifted up. And people were looking at me saying, what the hell are you looking at? And the woman next to me, who is a great seer, she sees this all around her all the time. She's laughing at this. And they're saying, what the hell are you two laughing at? I said, can't you see this guy? He's very proud. And he kept walking with me all the way to the edge of the energy field of the mound. And then pop, he disappears, because now he's no longer in that electromagnetic environment. He's about to leave. So they are held within that portal. The energy is within that portal. But the thing is, if that had happened in Persia, they would have looked very, very different, because Onion Head would have frightened the hell out of the local Arab people. So they appear like genies. That's where the jinn comes from. The word jinn comes from. Mm-hmm. And they usually appear as sort of green beings in their culture. And that makes them very comfortable. They talk about the same thing at the pyramids. I know there's a couple of the guards there very well. They're very spiritual people. And once they realize that you're there not to be a tourist and you're there to respect, they open up. And some of the stories they told me about, at the end of the day, the tourists have gone home and they're closing up the building. And I'm looking at him like, you know what I'm saying? I said, yeah, not closing up with a key. I'm talking about closing energetically. I said, yes. And he said, there's sometimes, at certain times of the month, we see the jinn wrapping themselves around the building like a ball of light, and then going to the top and going, poof, disappearing. And I said, and they usually have a little orange halo around them. That's right. I said, yeah, I've got a picture of them in my back wallet. I took this one when I was in Wiltshire, and I said, that's exactly how they appear here at the pyramids. And I thought, wow. So he's just validated what I had, and I validated his experience. So that's wonderful.
You say some of these spaces, the magnetite is one of the minerals, and then quartz. And these are really a very important part of some of these energy spaces.
Oh, totally. I mean, we hear stories of rocks being dragged 400 miles from far away. And you think, well, why not make your life much easier and just drag the rock that was only 50 yards away to make your temple? And I spent years looking at this, and it didn't make any sense. And then I learned more about geology, and I began to put one and one together. It's about the type of quartz. There's a huge amount of quartz and a specific type of quartz in all these stones. And then there's the iron in the stone, and then the particles of magnetite. Now, that is interesting in itself, because those three things are fundamental to the human body. So the quartz is found, of course, in silica, which makes up bone structure. And, of course, without all of that, we'd be walking around like sort of boneless chickens. There would be no bone to us. The next one, the iron, is what flows through the veins of your body and gives you that sort of red color. Basically, we're filled with rust, so it's kind of funny, isn't it? And then the magnetite, there's millions of particles of magnetite floating around in your skull right now. That's what allows you to orient yourself to magnetic north. So those three things are mirrored in the choice of rock that they use. And you put those rocks together. Let's say you have a few sort of 100 tons of these things, and when you put them together, you start getting this piezoelectric effect. And if you can also move the stones so that their magnetic field is facing each other or repelling each other, creating this sort of particle chamber, just like you have in Geneva, where they study particle physics. And you find this at Avebury in England, the world's biggest stone circle. You find this in Newgrange and the other Passage Mounds in Ireland. You find them all over the world. And again, they're dictating the way that energy moves from the surrounding landscape. The energy is attracted to the sites, and then it gets doubled at sunrise, so that the energy going into the actual site accentuates what is already in the landscape. And there's no physicist I have spoken to that can explain how that is possible, that these stone structures are able to double what the Earth can produce. It shouldn't happen under normal rules, but yet here we are. We can now measure this stuff. So no wonder people like going to these places at the crack of dawn, because that's exactly when the highest point of electromagnetic frequency peaks at sunrise. And you want to go there and you want to get that hit of energy. Energy junkies, as I call them, and I do sort of admire them, because I hate getting up in the morning, so I usually have to rely on secondhand information for this stuff. But yeah, once in a while, if the weather's really nice, I will get out there at the crack of dawn. And yes, you really do feel a rush of energy. And if you try to go the opposite way, it's like walking into an invisible wall of water. And it's quite definite that that energy wants to go towards the main side of the portal, which, of course, we ended up calling the altar. That's where you get altered.
Portals, energetic doorways to mystical experiences between worlds, part of the Common Sentience series. Freddy Silva, a quick break. Portals, energetic doorways to mystical experiences between worlds. Freddy Silva, the website invisibletemple.com. A portal described as a point of possibility, a step into 1,000 journeys. It sounds like a real natural amplification process that you're able to tap into.
It really is. And I know a guy a scientist who stuck thousands of electrical probes around Stonehenge and Avebury in England. And he was literally blown away by the fact that, yes, you can actually measure and watch on a computer the energy of the land dissipating in the evening. Just like a person after a long day at work, you lost your energy. You just want to go to the pub and have a drink and have a chat with your mates. And then you go to sleep. And then it said just before dawn, all the energy is attracted to these henge monuments, and it circles around the monuments at the moment where the energy of the sun creeps just over the horizon. You know, that wonderful sort of hieroglyph where you have the half sun over a straight line. And there's the reason why the Egyptians created a hieroglyph, because that's the moment when the electromagnetic frequency reaches its peak. And that's when the floodgates open. So all of this is measurable, and it's very palpable.
Well, you talk about how to engage with a portal, and I think that's what everybody wants to know. But the other thing is, you go back to the no expectation. Just allow it and don't try to project. Just go with pretty much no idea of what is possible. Just show up. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes absolute sense. Otherwise, it comes from your head and your need for validation. It might make you feel good for a while, but in the end, it's not going to serve you. It's part of the pollution and the low signal-to-noise ratio we have today. Or you might as well just stick to YouTube and listen to all of that nonsense. No, the important thing is to go there without any expectation. Go there with a clear intention. That's the most important thing. You can't just sort of walk in like a lemming and expect things to happen, because the universe is like a duplicating machine, and it will say, well, what do you want? You're here. And you'll sit there, looking at the stones and not having any clear idea of what you're doing. And they'll just figure you're just passing through, you're just a tourist, and okay, bye. If you go there with a clear intention, they'll pick it up, and they'll send you in unmistakable terms signals, dreams, voices, coincidences, any tool that is applicable to you as an individual. And it's up to you to be aware of those signals when they come up. And when you do, life becomes a big, fast-moving stream, and you better be on a good boat, because it's going to take you somewhere. But the other thing that's important is about mindfulness. We today suffer from a lack of mindfulness. There's too much going on. And that's another thing that I'm very keen when I take people to these places. Of course, everybody's very excited. They've got their cameras and their cell phones. And I said, look, keep the cell phones in your pocket. Just put it all away. For example, I want to show you how mindful you are right now. And hands go up. I'm very mindful. I practice this. Okay. Tell me 10 sounds that you heard in the last 15 minutes. And I'll get to 2, and that's it. People have lost track of anything. I said, okay, go for a walk. Okay. Just go for a walk, 15 minutes. I want you to expand your vision and your hearing. Okay. and come back to me 15 minutes from now. And they do. They come back 15 minutes later, and I'll say, I'm going to repeat my question. Name 10 sounds you heard in the last 15 minutes, and then you can't shut them up. I said, congratulations, you're now mindful. Your senses are now so expanded that you can hear a tap dripping 50 feet away. And that's when you get to the point where you start seeing with your peripheral vision unusual things moving at these portals, because again, the veil between worlds is very thin at these locations, and it's not a figment of your imagination. Part of your vision is capturing a slice of a film in time of something that happened there a long time ago. Now, you keep doing that again and again and again, and like driving a car, it becomes second nature, and that's where a point where you become psychic. You can actually see these things in real space-time. And again, you've got to be ready for that, because it can be quite shocking and disturbing. But again, you got to remove the fear aspect out of it at all. You can't go into this with fear. You have to accept that none of this is there to hurt you. It's just unusual. And if you get used to the unusualness, then it becomes like an extended family for you. And then you're very comfortable with what's going on.
You talk about meeting the Zuni elder, Clifford Mahudi. He's now deceased, but you talked about a special experience with him and something that you said was very humbling, I guess.
There was a couple. If it's the one that I think there was one where he was saying, "Yeah, we should go down to look at the people that are painted in the Horseshoe Canyon." And I said, "Yeah, I always wanted to go and see that when I was a young child." If anybody is not familiar with this, it's a painting called the Ghost Panel. Terrible name, and it's of these 7 figures that are cloaked. Nothing like what Anasazi people are supposed to look like in the desert. And there's an 8th sort of person that seems to be overarching of them all. And I always wanted to go there. And it's a huge, huge trek down there. It's 104 degrees, and that's only at 5 in the morning. And yes, I did get up that early for that. So 6 hours through this canyon, and you finally bump into this, and it was like, yeah, they're life-size. They're 8.5 feet tall. Just like the bones of the giant people who were the shining ones in real life that we found throughout Britain and France. And I thought, I knew these people were very familiar. And I spoke to Clifford about them. I said, well, they were very familiar. And I said, yeah, you should be very familiar with them because you've been researching them from the beginning. Those are the watchers. We call them the lookers. Oh, really? And I thought, okay, so these people are actually painted on the wall. But my favorite one of his was about talking about Chaco Canyon. I said, you know what? I'd never been convinced by the fact that big circular building is a kiva. It's too impersonal for a kiva. And secondly, it's too big to hold a roof, and there's no evidence that there was ever a roof in there. I'm not convinced. And especially, there's a big shape on the wall. The entrance is shaped like a T, which is a wonderful sort of symbol around the world that is called the Tao, which means the breath of God. So through the doorway is where the knowledge of the gods comes through, or where the gods themselves walk through. And he says, that's pretty perceptive. I said, so how close am I? I said, pretty close, because the kiva, so-called kiva in Chaco Canyon, was a spaceport. It's supposed to be a landing place for the flying shields. Of course, you know these people as the Anunnaki, and we call them the lookers or the watchers. Same people, really. So Clifford was so knowledgeable. I do miss him.
There's an area that you might be interested in. I don't know if you're already familiar with it or not. South America, where they've got the prehistoric engravings, 1,000, and they think this is the largest example of prehistoric rock art. They think it might even be just the tip of the iceberg in this area. I don't know if you've heard about it, but I'm expecting now that it is being made public that you might take your next group there. Just, a hunch.
To South America? No, I'm not familiar with that site, actually, but it wouldn't surprise me. South America is very raw. You really got to know what you're doing. I mean, I've always wanted to go there. One of my earliest graphic novels was actually set in South America, and it has a picture of one of the chulpas, which were used way before the Inca. The Inca rarely built anything. They inherited someone else's culture. And they had this picture of this chulpa that was used for out-of-body initiation. People go there for 3 days, they'd be buried inside there, and then they would take the rock out in the morning 3 days later, and people were declared risen from the dead. And that was over 6,000 years ago, that phrase. And these things were everywhere. And you know what? It took until I was about 50 before I was allowed to go anywhere near Peru. And just as well, it's very raw energy. And I might sound like a Taipei guy. I'm actually a sort of a type B guy in a type A body. I'm very much connected to my feminine side. In fact, I have a deficiency in the masculine. And a lot of my friends think I'm sort of gay or something, which is a compliment, I have to say. A lot of my friends are actually gay people, and they're very artistic, so I admire that. But no, I'm very much heterosexual, but my energy is much more connected to the subtler and much softer sides around the world. So it took me a while to get the gumption to actually build up that electric frequency inside my body, because you're going to raise your corporeal energy to match that of the site. If it doesn't, the site will politely tell you to go somewhere else. And it took until 50 till I was allowed to go to South America. And I'm so glad, because then I understood what it was all about. And now I seem to have a little bit more of a plus in the masculine side since I've been there. But I've seen people that definitely push their way to South America, and they get there, and 3 days later, they're on the plane back home. They're totally exhausted and fried. The site will say, look, we're going to make sure you don't come here. We'll make sure your plane gets delayed, or something will happen, or you'll twist an ankle or something. And if you still keep pushing it, you'll come here, and then you will not feel well. And I've had that experience as well in England. I wanted to go to a place called the Devil's Den. So guarantee that if the site is called the Devil's something, it's the Catholic Church telling you it's really good for you. So, and this happens all around the world.
Yeah.
It was part of their philosophy of turning people away from places that were beneficial. And so the first time I went there was this booming voice in the middle of this sort of barley field that said, "You're not going to go any closer. Thank you. Bye-bye." And I thought the farmer was out looking for blood, because it was a private field. And I thought, maybe I'm trespassing, and he's found me. But I couldn't see anybody. So I, jumped my leg over the gate. And again, it was like, "You're not going to come any closer." I thought, okay, I'm feeling a little bit fearful right now, so I hauled my ass over the field and got into the car and went and had a cup of tea with my friend, the psychic, and she's making a cup of tea and turns around and says, "Have you just come from the Devil's Den?" I said, "Yeah, why? How do you know?" And I said, "Well, this raw energy, it's one of the oldest sites in the south of England. You're not ready for that yet. You're still learning this stuff. Go and play, go and learn, gather experience, and 3 years from now, come back." I said, "Okay, I'll make a mental note of that." And I followed the advice, and sure enough, 3 years later, I'm sitting there having my breakfast, and, I haven't been to the Devil's Den in 3 years. I think I need to go back there. I went there, and it was like someone rolled out the red carpet. It was like, now you know what you're doing, and now you're more connected with this frequency. You can approach. And since then it's been a wonderful relationship. So there is that sort of built-in protection for people who are a little bit too curious, but it's not gonna. You don't have 9 lives like a cat, so don't push it. If the site says no, it's not for you, we're gonna send you down the river to somewhere else.
Well, and you talk about one of the guys who was very aggressive, I guess. Touched the stone, threw him back about 14 feet.
That was a really funny thing. Not for him. We were in France.
Not for him.
You have to have a sense of humor when you do this work, because it really is theatre. So we were at this standing stone, this menhir in Brittany, and people were amazed. The whole group was amazed, like, "That's a big stone." I said, "No, that's not a big stone. That's only 39 feet tall. That's just preparation for the one down the road." It took 16 people to hold hands to measure the girth of that stone, just to give you an idea of the scale of the stuff. And so I said, this would be a good time to get involved with the energy field of the stone. And I'm going to demonstrate that if we tap in to the frequency, and if you can hear the note of the stone, because each stone has its own note, and if you can hear that note, you can project the note back. And as you're toning into the stone, put a wish or a word of gratitude into what you're saying, and it goes into the quartz of the stone. The stone reacts to that. It's like watering a plant. It's going to react in kind. So to demonstrate this simple thing, I'm going to take out my dowsing rods, and I'm going to show you that around this physical stone, there is an energy field. It's its calling card, its business card. It contains all the information there is to know about the stone. And sure enough, about 12 feet around the actual stone, there is a definite energy field, and the rod just crossed right there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make a mark in the sand here. And there was one guy that's standing a little further away. I said, what's the matter? Well, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with this New Age ritual. I said, well, you are on one of my tours. I said, well, I was raised as a Catholic. I came here because of my girlfriend. Oh, okay. You don't have to explain. I get it. That's fine. Sit it out. It's not a judgment thing. Just sit on the picnic table over there and just do what you want. Just be quiet. That's all. And just give us some respect. Okay. And the management was putting this idea into my head that I should go over to where he was sitting and put a mark on the ground with my rod, and actually put one of my rods into the ground. I thought, that's unusual. This is not going to end well. So I did it, and we went back. We hummed and toned, and there was a moment where you've got the right frequency because your ears started popping, and everybody's getting completely sucked into the rock. I mean, you can feel the energy of the whole group just by holding hands, that we're all becoming part of the stone. It's a wonderful experience, which is hard to explain. And I heard a thud behind me, and I thought, that's going to hurt. And we stopped. We're all we're all drained and sweaty. And then I said, okay, take a deep breath. I'm going to douse to see if what we've done has had any effect on the energy field around the stone. So I kept dowsing, and I went right past the original marker, and the rods didn't move. So the energy field kept going and going and going, and eventually 36 feet away, they finally reacted. And I thought, we've just tripled the energy field around the stone. It's the stone saying thank you. That's all it's doing. But we're also now within its energy field, so watch out for those dreams that you're about to get. Meanwhile, exactly where my rods reacted, the guys on the floor that had been sitting on the picnic table, and I said, what the hell happened to you? And I lifted him off the ground. He dusted himself. And they said, I don't know what happened, but there was a moment where you guys just hit a certain note. And it's like this invisible wall of water just hit me and knocked me right over. And I looked down where he fell, and there was my other dowsing rod with the marker exactly at that spot. And I said, that's what happened. You just got hit by the energy field that the stone had told me that it was going to project as a result of what we were doing with it. And from that point on, you couldn't shut him up. You couldn't keep him away from any upright rock. It was a wonderful moment.
Once you get bowled over by an energy field, it's pretty much a slam dunk you're going to believe.
Yeah, and it's a very non-threatening way of doing it. I mean, yeah, he's got his Catholic beliefs. That's cool. It's not my belief, but that's okay. I think he just had to be given something to hang his hat on. And I think that proved a very good thing. In fact, we went to Chartres Cathedral after that, and, which you expect to be a sort of a Christian place, but actually it's not. The whole building is designed according to Arabic principles. So it's kind of ironic. And I had these arguments, or I should say fundamentalist Christians had these arguments with me that was a church dedicated to Christianity. I said, well, not really, because it was the Cistercians and the Knights Templar that brought the plans from the Middle East, and they're all based on the architecture of Arabic culture, including the actual deviations from building normal, which include the divisions of the music scale. So what you're going into is this massive musical box, and the Arabs did it way before anybody in Europe knew what the hell to do with a bunch of stones. So you're actually walking into an Arabic building, and that really upsets them. I said, yeah, but you can check it up. It's absolutely true. The point is, it's not about denomination. It's about the effect. And the Arabs, of course, got their information from the Indians and the Egyptians. So we're talking about the same technology, just hardwired into a de facto Christian building to achieve that wonderful effect. And I remember when the Russian scientists were looking into this mumbo-jumbo, and the Russians were way ahead of the world in this kind of research. They said, it's funny that we have no money to build anything in the Soviet Union, and we need some hospitals. And we found that there was a huge history of healing and altered states of consciousness in these Gothic cathedrals in Europe. So we figured there must be a way to measure this in real scientific terms. So they would take people into these Gothic cathedrals, and they would stand them upright in the nave, in the middle of the building, right where the telluric current goes through, by the way. And they would strap them up with these ridiculous devices on their forehead, strapped to a computer. They could actually measure their brainwaves in real time. And then they said, right, can you do some chanting with Gregorian chant, which is the kind of pop music that was developed for those buildings. So they started singing the Gregorian chant, and suddenly their brainwaves go up 4,000% above normal waking state. So they've finally proved that, yeah, you connect with a certain frequency with the portal in these buildings, and you become much more than the sum of your parts.
On your website, you have the crop circle resonance cards, and you're talking about healing. And these are also something that a tool that people could use if they are interested in possibly helping them manifest a certain type of healing, depending on what they're looking for. But I thought that was fascinating. You've incorporated this into a workable tool.
Yeah, and it was a part of the idea of making this very practical, because there's so many people that say, well, I live nowhere near a sacred site. There's no portals anywhere here near me. Well, there's one in my living room. These things are everywhere. You just have to be sensitive to them, and some are more worked and more powerful than others, just like some plants are much more vitalic than others. So I figured there must be a way to bring the portal and the energy to people, and that's when we were doing, in the crop circle research, we were collecting hundreds of stories of people who'd walk into crop circles believing that they were made by people, and suddenly they'd have these spontaneous healings. And I thought, that doesn't happen to skeptics. That happens for people who want it to happen, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're essentially healing yourself for your own belief system. And I figured there must be a way to transfer the energy in some practical way. Well, it turns out that there was an institute in Germany that was doing exactly that. And one day they had this machine where you can transmit this healing code, or this geometric code, I should say, to a place somewhere else on the planet. Let's say a forest that is dying or a river that is polluted, and they would measure the energy of the organism that they were treating from a distance, and they found that they could alter the healing ability of these places. We call it radionics for short,
Yeah.
or resonance therapy. And they said that one day, just for fun, and German scientists usually don't do things for fun, so when they say just for fun, we're going to use the pictures of the crop circles, and they found that the real crop circle pictures carry the same codes that transmit to organisms. So I thought, oh, wait a minute. I have been going around for a decade measuring the real crop circles, and I have a lot of surveys which are very accurate. And as a graphic designer, I can make these, I can reduce these, put them on cards, and put them into radionic devices. What a great idea. The trouble is, the symbol by itself doesn't carry the energy. There's a secret process which I can't reveal on pain of death, and I will never reveal it to anyone. It's basically to maintain the integrity of the process. So I'm going to respect that. But yeah, I developed this card system. Again, 49 cards, so 7 times 7. And I didn't choose that. Someone else did that for me. And you can imagine who. And I'd never, ever advertised these things. And almost, 30 years later, they're selling like hotcakes. And some of the responses that I get from people are extraordinary. I'm not even allowed to call them healing cards or anything, because I'd be done by the FDA. No, I just call them resonance cards. And I give you a series of instructions, very simple instructions. And the feedback is unbelievable. I've got some of the case histories on my website, and I think one of my documentaries as well on sacred space and the healing power of resonance. But essentially, it was the same concept of taking the energy of a portal and the intent of a portal and putting it on a piece of card and using this unusually secret system in order to transmit that information across time and space. So finally, we're able to not just make the portals useful, but we can actually take the portal to the person wherever they live. So I felt pretty good about that, because it becomes a practical science.
Well, I think people who study radionics, and I can't remember, there's a book, one of the original, I think, people who was working with this type of healing energy or influential energy had a book with a whole bunch of symbols in it, each one designed for a specific ailment. And unfortunately, I can't remember, it's off the top. I didn't even think about talking about that. But anyway, or Masaru Emoto, who was doing the water research, the symbols that you put next to water. This stuff is for what it's worth. We don't have all of the science to say, yes, it works, but you are obviously on the cutting edge saying, okay, come on, wake up.
Yeah, because it came from personal experience and the experience of people who were skeptical about all of this. And we gathered hundreds and hundreds of cases. And then the Germans got involved. And before you know it, you're on this conveyor belt of possibility. So there is a valid science behind it. And it's measurable. In fact, the German group, and I don't know if they're still around, this was about 20 years ago, they actually had the approval of the Austrian government to the point where they were commissioned by the Austrian government to cleanse the energy of there was a park in Salzburg, famous case, and they said, well, we've spent millions clearing up this park and making it look good. Nobody wants to go there. So they basically, from their office in Germany, they would find the symbol that would transmit this code to the ecosystem in Salzburg, and they measured the leaf density of the shrubs and the trees over a course of 3 years, because this stuff sometimes takes a little long. Sometimes it happens immediately, and sometimes it takes longer. It just depends on the nature of the problem. And they said that there was a rise in the actual efficacy of the shrubs and trees in that park, and 2.5 years later into the process, people suddenly began to go there in droves. And they reasoned that they must have sent a healing code to the organism that forms the hard drive of the park. And they said, we must have cleansed some kind of memory that was really catastrophic to stop people from going there. They didn't know what had happened, but they were feeding something untoward. Well, they did some research that went back to the Second World War, and they found that the Nazis had actually shot a whole bunch of people there. The energy of the catastrophe was still in the memory of the water in the park. So the process helped to remove the energy, reprinted the hard drive, and then people felt that new energy and they were drawn there. So it's a wonderful case out of many hundreds that led us to this conclusion.
When you go to a site, a portal, or anywhere, a sacred space, you also say that there is an issue with diet, and you want to pay attention to that.
You want to take the least of yourself as you can, by which I mean the least amount of your physical body. And yes, fasting is a great way. Now, Egypt, again, is a great idea to demonstrate this. I'm a carnivore by nature. I don't apologize for it. It's who I am. I eat vegetables and fish, but, I need that extra amount of energy to keep myself going. And so for me to go to Egypt and not eat, it's a bit of a problem. So I get there and I suddenly start eating vegetables all day long. I drink a lot of water, eat a lot of fruit, and I can get by effortlessly. And I say the same thing to people. I said, just don't take that much with you. Eat in the evening if you have to, but even then you don't feel like eating. And it makes a huge difference because much more of your density is removed, and you're able to fine-tune this wonderful temple that you're walking around in to such a point where you connect much easier with the spirit of place. And I started doing that now much more than when I first started, and it does make a huge difference. Your body is lighter. You're carrying less density around you. You're connecting much quicker with the frequency of the portal inside the temple, and the effect can be quite immediate. I've watched people go into these places and they already know the room that they're going to into before I even told them which room to go into. They're already preceding what I'm going to say, and they've never been there before. So they're already picking up on it. I don't have to tell them anything. So half of my job is made much easier just by telling people, just don't stuff yourself with all of that stuff. You don't need it. And you'll be amazed how much you can go by in the hot climate doing all of this work. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to go up and down pyramids and, 400-foot shafts and things like that, especially when you come out, soaked to the skin with perspiration. And you just drink a lot of water, have some dried fruits, and some vegetables. And it's amazing how easily you can get by. And by the end of the week, not only do you feel better, you look much better too.
Well, you are very, very busy, obviously, with all the interviews that you do and the traveling you do. And I think Portugal, I think that's the one that's sold out. And you were in Sedona. This is a wonderful lifestyle. I'm from being 38 and stuck.
I make it look fun. It's very difficult lifestyle. It makes for difficult relationships. I mean, I keep joking about this in various interviews that the hardest thing about my job is not having a girlfriend to share your life with. It's hard to find someone that can put up with me traveling so much of the year on the airplanes, unless they're stinking rich and they can afford to come with me, in which case, here's my phone number. But yeah, it does require a lot of you. It requires you to have a special relationship with a few friends that you end up having. It's a lonely life, but my friends are large upright rocks, and I cannot tell you how happy I am when I get off a plane and go and stand next to these temples. And it's like being with an extended family that you actually want to spend time with. And how many times can you say that about your own family? It's like, oh, here comes Christmas again. Do I really have to get and hang out with the Joneses or whatever? These are people you actually want to hang out with. And I've never been let down by them. They don't make my life that much easier because I've chosen that path for myself. That's part of my journey. But they do give you comfort, and I do take comfort in being around them. And that's what makes my job so much easier. And of course, when people react to the material that I do with the documentaries and the books, then of course it's all worthwhile because I see people taking pleasure from it and making their lives better. So one day when I finally get shoved off this mortal coil and I can say, you know what, I think I've made the world 1% better than when I found it, and that's good enough for me.
Well, I think you've done a phenomenal job. I mean, if crop circles was what it took to get you started, you have absolutely gone through the goalposts, okay? Just...
Yeah, who'd know I'd be here writing about all of these strange topics, which, of course, they're all linked in some way, and I had no idea. And that, for me, has also been great fun.
InvisibleTemple.com, that's the website. Okay, what's the next big event, big tour that you're looking forward to that isn't sold out?
50 seconds. Well, that was unbelievable. I had hate mail from people. And I said, you know what? I think we have to find a new method of doing this because we tried to send out the emails to people around the world at a time when someone is either awake or just about to get up in the morning or about to go to bed. You can't please everybody, but it did surprise the hell out of me. I was about to put this on Facebook, and I got an email from the lady that handles my tours, and she said, don't bother. All the places have gone. And I thought, we're obviously doing something very well.
You poor
and so
thing.
next time we're going to have a lottery. So we just issued the lottery for Egypt for 2025. That was much easier. I said, I'm only going to take about 24 people. I want to keep it personal and still make it profitable. And that worked out much better, I think. And the right people end up going anyway. But I have to say, I'm enjoying watching the fact that I don't need to advertise. It means that we're doing something right. So let's hope that continues.
And you're going to have to be bird dogging this site if you want to get a ticket to anything that Freddy does. Okay, because I'm looking at the site, sold out, sold out. So it's like, my gosh, that's why I said, is there anything that isn't sold out?
I'll just go on my mailing list. That's the easier one.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to get the cards, okay? I want the cards because I want those symbols. I think that's a real slam dunk. Hey, thank you.
Well, thank you.
The book is out now. There are other stories in here from people who've also had experiences with portals, available at Amazon or theinvisibletemple.com. And Freddy, thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks, Wendy. It's been great.
Portals, energetic doorways to mystical experiences between worlds, part of the Common Sentience series. And if you're curious about crop circles, available now the 20th anniversary edition of Secrets in the Fields, the Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles. A final thought from Freddy.
Best piece of advice, expect nothing, but go there with a very clear, specific aim. Give the universe the big picture of the playing field and the goalposts, and let them kick the ball through the goalposts for you, and then you pick it up on the other side. Links are in the description for the show. Thanks for listening.